Welcome to Omas True Stories. This is Amina's true
In a
story.
quiet village, there lived a beautiful woman named Amina. Known for her graceful beauty, she carried a secret. Every morning, as the first rays of sunlight touched the land, Amina would turn into a majestic bird, her feathers shining like gold in the sun. She would soar into the enchanted forest that bordered the village, where she would spend the entire day, only to return as herself when the sun set. The villagers often wondered where Amina went during the day. Her husband, Ades, was the only one who knew the truth. Despite her transformation, Ades loved her as days passed. The villagers began to grow curious about Amina. They noticed something strange. Every morning, just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, she would vanish from the village. No one saw her at the market or the well, and her husband always deflected questions about her absence. One day, a group of village women gathered outside Amina's home, whispering among themselves. They were determined to uncover her secret. How can a woman be so mysterious? She never steps out during the day, one of them said, peering through the open window. Another added, and yet every evening she returns home glowing and full of grace. Something isn't right here. That afternoon, the women followed Amina's husband as he left the house. They were hoping to ask him questions, but he disappeared into the forest before they could approach him. As the sun set and night fell, Amina returned to the house. She looked around, sensing something was off. She closed the door softly behind her and sat by the window, staring out into the distance, her heart heavy with a secret she could not share. But little did she know, one of the women had decided to hide nearby and watch her every move. What she witnessed would shake the entire village. The night passed quietly, and the village woman who had been watching stayed hidden in the shadows. As the first light of dawn began to creep into the sky, something magical began to unfold. Amina, unaware of her observer, stepped out into the moonlit garden behind her home. She glanced around, ensuring no one was nearby, then slowly spread her arms wide, raising them toward the sky. Her form shimmered faintly under the moonlight, and a soft glow enveloped her body. In an instant, Amina's graceful figure began to change. Her delicate hands turned into wings, her skin into soft feathers. Her once human form vanished, replaced by a magnificent bird with shimmering multicolored plumage. She let out a gentle cry and flew into the early morning sky, disappearing into the horizon before the village began to wake. The woman, trembling with disbelief, could hardly process what she had seen. Amina was no ordinary villager. She was enchanted, living half her life as a beautiful woman and the other half as a bird. Determined to tell the others, the woman rushed back to the village, her heart racing. But how would she explain what she had seen? And would anyone believe her? The village woman who witnessed Amina's transformation could barely sleep that night. As soon as dawn broke, she gathered a small group of villagers and hurried to the elder's hut. Breathlessly, she recounted what she had seen, how Amina had turned into a bird and flown away into the sky. At first, the villagers were skeptical, but curiosity quickly overtook their doubt. They all agreed to keep a watchful eye on Amina to uncover the truth. Over the following days, they observed her closely, waiting for another sign of her mysterious nature. Amina, now sensing that the village was beginning to grow suspicious, became more cautious. She felt trapped between two worlds, her life as a bird and her life as a woman and a wife. Each night she returned to her home, her heart heavy with the burden of her secret. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the sun dip below the horizon, her husband entered the room. His face was troubled, and in his eyes she saw something that made her blood run cold. He knew. The villagers had already begun to whisper among themselves. Soon everyone would know about her transformation. What would happen then? Would they turn on her, or would they understand that she was still the same Amina, no matter what form she took? Amina turned away from the window and sat down, deep in thought. Her husband approached her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to hide anymore," he whispered. "Let them see who you truly are." The next morning, the village buzzed with the whispers of those who had heard the rumors about Amina. As she stepped outside, she could feel the weight of their stares, the hushed conversations growing louder as she passed. They watched her closely, waiting for something to confirm the unbelievable. Amina knew she could no longer hide her secret. She glanced at her husband, who nodded, silently urging her to face the villagers. As she approached the village square, the crowd gathered and one of the elders stepped forward. Amina, is it true? The villagers say you are not like us, that you transform into a bird at dawn. Is this true? His voice carried both disbelief and concern. Amina stood tall, her heart pounding. She looked into the faces of those she had lived among for years, their curiosity mixed with fear. With a deep breath, she spoke softly, yes, it is true. By day I am a bird, by night I am Amina, a woman and your neighbor. The crowd gasped and murmurs filled the air. Some looked frightened, others confused, but Amina held her ground, waiting for their reaction. One of the villagers stepped forward, her face softening. Amina, you have always been kind, and we know your heart. You have never harmed anyone. Why should this change anything? The elder nodded slowly. She speaks the truth. What matters is not what Amina becomes during the day, but who she is when she stands before us as a woman. Gradually, the fear in the crowd began to fade. Acceptance started to replace suspicion. They realized that Amina's transformation did not make her any less of a part of their village. As the villagers dispersed, Amina smiled softly at her husband, relieved and grateful that her secret was no longer a burden. In the days that followed, the village returned to its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Amina was no longer a mystery to the villagers. They had accepted her for who she truly was, and though her transformation remained a wonder, it was no longer a source of fear. Every morning as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Amina would spread her wings and take to the skies. The villagers watched her with awe, pointing to the bird soaring above, knowing that she would return by nightfall as the Amina they had always known. Her dual life became part of the village's story, a tale shared around the evening fires. Amina, for the first time in years, felt free. She no longer had to hide or live in fear of being discovered. She could be both the bird that soared through the skies and the woman who cherished her home and loved her husband. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, Amina and her husband stood together at the edge of the village, gazing at the horizon. You've always been free, Amina, her husband said softly. But now you truly live as you were meant to, without fear. Mina smiled, her heart full of gratitude. She had found her balance, living between two worlds, and she knew that no matter what form she took, she was always herself. The village had accepted her, and in turn, Amina had finally accepted herself. As time passed, Amina's story became legend in the village. The villagers would often gather around the evening fires, recounting the tale of the woman who turned into a bird and soared beyond the skies. Her husband, though he missed her presence, found peace in knowing that Amina had become something eternal and free. The village too changed. A new respect for nature and the mysteries of the world around them grew. Whenever they saw a beautiful bird flying high above the village, they smiled, believing it was Amina watching over them, a protector of both the earth and sky. Children were born who only knew Amina as a story, yet they were raised to understand the beauty of embracing one's true nature, no matter how different or magical it might be. The legend of Amina was passed down through generations, teaching love, acceptance, and the importance of living in harmony with nature. One day, years after Amina had taken her final flight, her husband stood at the edge of the village, watching the birds fly across the sky. He smiled, knowing that her spirit was always with him. In that moment, he felt her presence, as if the wind itself carried her love back to him. The village thrived, and Amina's legacy lived on, not just in the skies, but in the hearts of the people who remembered her story. Years passed, and Amina's story continued to spread far beyond the village. Travelers who visited the village would hear of the woman who had become a bird, and they in turn would tell others. Soon, people from distant lands came to see the village, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bird that flew so freely above it. believing it to be the spirit of Amina. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the villagers gathered for another storytelling session. This time, as they shared the legend of Amina, a magnificent bird appeared in the sky, its wings catching the last light of the setting sun. The bird flew in wide circles above the village, its movements graceful and majestic. The villagers stood in awe, their faces turned upward as they whispered, "It's Amina." The bird descended slowly, flying low over the village as if to greet the people who had loved her and cherished her story. Children pointed excitedly, while the elders nodded in quiet reverence, knowing that Amina's spirit would always watch over them. After making one final circle, the bird soared high into the sky, disappearing into the clouds as the night began to settle in. From that day forward, the villagers knew that every time they saw a bird flying high above, it was Amina, still watching over them, a guardian spirit of the sky. As generations passed, the village continued to thrive, and Amina's presence was felt in every corner of their lives. The story of Amina became a part of their identity, woven into songs, dances, and traditions that celebrated her spirit of freedom and transformation. Each year during the Festival of the Sky, the villagers would gather at sunset, singing songs of Amina and her journey from a woman to a bird. The festival became a time for honoring not only Amina, but the idea that every person, no matter their form or nature, could soar to new heights. One evening, during the festival, a young girl stood at the edge of the village, gazing at the sky. She had heard the story of Amina her whole life, and as she watched the birds flying overhead, she whispered a quiet prayer to the guardian of the sky. Suddenly, one bird, more magnificent than the rest, broke away from the flock and flew down toward her. Its feathers shimmered in the fading sunlight, and for a moment, the girl felt a deep connection, as if Amina herself had come to greet her. The bird circled her once before flying back into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. The girl smiled, knowing that Amina's spirit would forever protect her village and its people. The festival continued, and the villagers danced under the stars, celebrating the legacy of Amina, the eternal guardian of the skies. The story of Amina continued to inspire not only the village, but the many who passed through, hearing the tale of the woman who became one with the sky. Her spirit lived on in every breeze, every bird that soared, and in the hearts of the villagers who honored her legacy year after year. One final evening during the quiet hour just before dusk, the sky above the village began to glow with an otherworldly light. The villagers, sensing something extraordinary, gathered at the edge of the village. As they looked up, they saw a vision that would be spoken of for generations. A majestic bird, larger and more radiant than ever before, appeared high in the sky. It circled the village, its wings outstretched, shimmering in the golden light of the setting sun. The villagers knew it was Amina, making one final flight to say goodbye, but also to remind them that she would always be watching over them. As the bird ascended higher into the clouds, it became one with the sky, disappearing into the horizon. The villagers stood in silence, filled with awe and reverence for the woman who had transcended both form and time. From that day forward, Amina's story became more than a legend. It was a symbol of freedom, transformation, and the power of embracing one's true self. And whenever the villagers saw a bird flying high above, they would smile, knowing that Amina was still there, her spirit forever soaring on the winds.